Good evening, everyone. Just giving people a few minutes to join. Everyone, I still see some folks joining, so even though it is 5:30, I'm going to just give it a couple more minutes before we take roll. Okay, well, why don't I go ahead and go through the roster just to ensure that we do have a quorum. I'm just going to read through it here, and if you could just respond if you're present. Sig Uranus.
Here.
Harvey Cates. No Harvey yet. Alan Chow.
Here.
Suraj Verma.
Here.
Jillian Keller.
Here.
Paul Malakowski.
Here.
Sorry. Dora Martinez. Vince Harris.
Here.
Lindsay Costello. Ben Miller. Mayuko Majima. About Jeff Bonanno. Laura Azam. Hey, Laura, I see you, but I don't hear you.
Here.
Okay.
Can you hear me
Thanks.
now?
I can, yeah. Thank
Okay.
you. Mike Slazinski.
Here.
Mauricio Urias.
Present.
Thank you. Okay, we do have a quorum. Just a couple quick reminders before I turn over to the chair to start the meeting. If everyone could please mute yourself unless you wish to speak. This meeting is, as always, being recorded, is also being broadcast live on RTC's YouTube channel. And also, if you could please state your name if you do make a motion. And Mr. Chair, if you would please repeat back who's made the motion just to help us out with the minutes. And I think that about covers it. With that, I would turn it over to Vince Harris to start the meeting.
Well, good evening, everyone, and Happy New Year 2021.
Thanks, Dan. And so we'll get started with item number 1. If I could get a motion to approve the agenda for the evening.
Oh, I'm sorry, Vince, just a point of order, just if you wouldn't mind stating the time to when you call the meeting to order.
The meeting is called to order at 5:34.
Thank you.
Can I get a motion to approve the agenda for the evening, please?
I move to approve the agenda.
Approved by Laura
Azam. Yeah.
Azam. Can I get a second, please?
I'll second, Suraj Verma.
Seconded by Suraj Verma. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Are there any opposed? Hearing none, item 1 is approved. We have an agenda for the evening. Moving on to item number 2. Did we get any public comment, staff, for this meeting this evening?
We did not, but I did just realize that I failed to acknowledge anyone else that's participating that isn't a CMAC member. So if you could just humor me while I read off the names that I have, I just want to capture that for the record. So RTC staff, myself, Daniel Denges, Jacqueline Maldonado, Amy Cummings, Jim Yee, Shen Wang. I believe that's it for RTC staff, unless I see a few numbers here. So if anyone I missed, can you please...
David Carr, I'm on an iPhone.
Okay. Anyone else from RTC? Okay, hearing none, and I do want to recognize that Jeremy Smith with TMRPA is also here on the call. Thanks, Jeremy. So sorry about that, minor distraction, but I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair. And I will note that like Harvey Cates is just joining too.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item number 3. Item number 3 is approval of the December 2nd, 2020 meeting minutes. Do we have any corrections, changes, or additions that anyone would like to add to the minutes? Changes, corrections, or additions? Okay, hearing none. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes of December 2nd, 2020? Can I get a motion, please?
Laura Azam, I move that we approve the agenda for the December 2020 minutes.
Item moved by Laura Azam. Can I get a second, please?
Mauricio Urias, I second.
Mr. Arias seconds the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Hearing none, the item passes. Thank you very much. We're moving right along on to item number 4. This acknowledged receipt of a presentation on an overview of the regional travel demand model and consensus forecast. Do we have a report from staff on this item?
Yeah, I'd like to introduce Shen Wang with RTC, and I think she will be co-presenting along with Jeremy Smith with TMRPA.
Okay, can everyone see my presentation?
Yes.
Looks good.
All right, so good evening and Happy New Year, everyone. My name is Xuan Wang. I'm a senior technical planner with the RTC. For this presentation, we also have Jeremy Smith, director of TMRPA. We will give an overview of the regional travel demand model and the consensus forecast. So the travel demand model is a computer model that is used in a lot of our transportation planning and the engineering process. Is a very useful tool. It's developed based on our understanding of the current travel patterns, and we use it to estimate the future travel demand. So the modeling process typically involves 4 different steps. The first step is called trip generation. So during trip generation, in the model, we divided an area into smaller zones. We call it transportation analysis zones, or TAZs. So based on the land use information in these TAZs, such as the number of housing units, population, businesses, number of employment, schools, the model generates number of trips associated with each zone. And with this total number of trips, the second step is called the trip distribution. So it generates basically a product like a table or a matrix showing number of trips from one zone to the other. So if, for example, if we have 3 zones, the product would be a 3x3 table showing the number of trips from one zone to the other. So the third step is called the mode choice. So during this step, the model estimates how many trips are going to be driving by bus, bike, pedestrian, or truck trips. And so it basically assigns different modes to these trips. And the final step is called a trip assignment. So during this step, the model uses the roadway network to assign traffic from one zone to the other along different routes. So sometimes we have different routes from one zone to the other. The model will estimate the travel time, and assign appropriate number of trips to different roadway segments. So through running through these steps, the model generates a lot of different and useful information for us. For example, origin and destinations, what trips are using a particular roadway segment, and the traffic volumes on different segments. So we use these to make informed decisions during our planning process. So this is kind of an overview of how the model works, even though it's listed here as 4 these separate steps. Sometimes these steps can be combined together with the evolving of the methodology and techniques. So even though it's not specifically these 4 steps, but this generally serves as the overall structure of the model. So the current RTC model was developed in 2016 after we did our regional-wide travel characteristic survey in 2015. We had a minor update last year in 2020, and this is what we're using for our 2050 RTP development. So as I said, the base model year is 2015, and then we have all the future model years from 2020 to 2050. We use this to forecast traffic for the future. So this map here shows the general model area. As you can see, it covers Reno, Sparks, and also Washoe County. We also included the Trade Center in Story County, just because of the increase in the employment in this area, and then we want to capture all the trips going associated with that area. So we have about 900 zones, TAZs, and we use this data to generate traffic. So if I open up the model, it's easier, I think. So basically, we have the region divided by into these transportation analysis zones, TAZs. If I click on any of these, you can see the data associated with this particular zone, including number of households for different model years, by income levels, by household sizes, population, school enrollment, and also employment associated with different employment categories. For example, this AMC means agriculture, mining, and construction, just because different types of businesses generate traffic differently. So using traffic generated from these TAZs, we can also overlay the roadway network. I'm gonna have it show it here. So you can see these dotted lines. These are called the centroid connectors. Basically, these are this TAZ here generates traffic, and is these centroid connectors load the traffic onto the roadway network. And after the model run, we will be able to click on these roadway segments and know the traffic volumes on these different roads. That's just a brief overview of how the model looks like. And so in order to make sure the model represents how people are traveling in our region, we periodically also conduct travel characteristics studies to provide the data support to make sure the model is operating as expected. So these are typically done every 10 years. So the last time we did it was in 2015. During that study, the goal was to collect the social demographic and the travel behavior data from both residents and visitors to build and improve the travel demand model. And of course, the data collected through these studies can be used for other purposes as well. So in the study, it included 3 different sub-surveys. The household travel survey focuses on the residents. The visitor survey is for visitors who had stayed in the region for at least 24 hours. And then we also had a transit survey, which is to provide the data for the transit sub-model within the travel demand model. So for the household travel survey, our goal was to survey at least 1% of the total households in our region. In 2015, we had about 160,000 households in Washoe County, and we mailed out at least over 28,000 postcards to invite people to participate. And the survey was done through a 2-stage data collection. So first, we recruit people to participate, and we send them questionnaire or have them fill out data about their demographic backgrounds. Things like how many people are in the households, their age group, income level, also occupation and the student status. So all the data that are needed for the model to consider. And then the second stage is called the retrieval stage. So we assigned a travel day for the household. So during that 24-hour assigned travel day, the household reports every single places they visited during the day, by what travel mode, duration. So in the end, we have a very rich, robust data set, and we have a good picture of how people were traveling during a typical weekday. So in the end, we had about over 2,000 samples were collected, which is higher than what our goal was. And over 10% of them were wearing also a GPS tracking device, because sometimes people forget to report some places they visited. So this GPS data can be used to develop adjustment factors. So we account for the unreported trips. For the visitor survey is similar, but this time we surveyed people who traveled to our area and stayed for at least 24 hours. Survey locations were mostly at lodging locations such as hotels, motels, and casino resorts. So we had interviewers with tablets waiting for people after they checked out. We asked them where they visited during the previous 24 hours. So we collected 421 samples, and these data were used to support the development of the visitor model within the travel demand model. We also have a transit component in the model. So for that, we collected transit user data. We collected about 4% of the total daily ridership, and this was done during 2 separate surveys. One is called the on to off-board survey. Basically, it tracks people where they got on the bus and where they got off the bus. We had 3,000 pairs of these samples, and these are used to weight and factor the actually collected survey. The onboard survey is a typical survey. We had interviewers on board ask the riders questions about their final origins and destinations, the mode they used to got onto the bus, and the mode they used to after they got off the bus. And also their personal information like age group, income level, similar demographic data like the previous surveys. So using these data, we were able to ensure the model give reasonable results, both at the upper level and the final results. The final results in terms of the traffic volumes, we also compare with the actual traffic counts to make sure the model is generating really good, accurate information. And we use the model, we calibrate the model for the base year, and then we assume the correlation carries over to future years. And that way we can estimate the future travel demand. So for our 2050 RTP development, we use the model to do a lot of the analysis. As you can see on the screen here, we make sure we put in all the proposed improvements into the model, either is capacity improvements, adding capacity, or building new roads. We code these improvements into the model network. And then when we run the model for future scenarios, we can see the traffic level and congestion level for analysis and see what projects are needed, what projects are improving the congestion. So as you can see, another important input is the land use input, because a different level of land use density or number of residential units and employment will change the number of trips generated from each zone. So it's very important that we have good estimates for where the growth are in our region. And this data was provided by TMRPA. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Jeremy, and he's going to give us an overview of the consensus forecast and how he developed the TAZ input. Jeremy, are you going to share your screen?
Yeah, thank you, Sean. I'm happy to share my screen. I'm ready with that.
Okay.
Thanks. Well, good evening. Thanks for having me. I'm Jeremy Smith. I'm the director of the Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Agency. Can you guys hear me all right? Pretty good. Okay, cool. I'm going to share the screen here and kind of continue. Are you seeing the TMRPA land use model slide there? Title slide? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Well, so as Schwinn mentioned, we are the ones that do quite a bit of spatial modeling to try to fill in those TAZs with not only the existing conditions in terms of households and population and jobs, but also future conditions. And this is this PowerPoint will give you a window into how we pull that off. The first place we really start is with something we call development tracking. And so really there's 2 sides to this, population and employment. And we really start with the Washoe County parcels. It's a great data set that's now publicly available to anyone to download. It's a really rich data set. And so we take a look at that. We use that data to get to an understanding of the existing number of dwelling units. And then we also look very closely at our conformance role as master plan sort of conformance people, but also looking at zoning changes and whatnot, the jurisdictions to understand which projects have been approved. So we're trying to track final maps, as well as any planned unit developments and tentative maps that get approved. And so we basically build all that into that parcel data set and augment it. And I'll show you kind of a picture of that in a sec. But we also get a product from a company called Info Group, which is a business point product. And it's probably the best thing out there that's available that tells you about where a business is, what kind of business it is, and that allows us to categorize it into the RTC categories, and then also how many employees are there. So that helps with trip generation. So that's something that takes a little bit of time. We have to kind of comb through the minutes sometimes of the local jurisdiction meetings like this. We might go look through meetings or minutes. But in the end, we get a parcel data set that's enhanced. And by enhanced, I sort of mean we have gone in and digitized on top of large parcels the actual lot footprints when we know them. So this picture at the right, for example, if you were to go, this is down in, I think it's an area called Sierra Reflections down in Pleasant Valley. And if you were to look at the parcel data down there right now, you'd probably see 6 or 7 giant parcels. It hasn't been subdivided yet. However, there is an active tentative map that's been approved for about 1,000 units. And so we've gone in and digitized those lot lines and put them in so that when we do our predictions, we have ideally, the best understanding of what's been approved through the process and what's possible. And so things we're looking for are the development status of a parcel. Has it already been developed or is it vacant? If it's vacant, we want to identify any constraints that exist in the parcel. So our regional plan really prohibits growth or development on slopes greater than 30%. So we categorize those and take those out of the potential. We take out water bodies and federal lands and that sort of thing. And it allows us to estimate the capacity of that future land. And so it's based either on strict zoning and kind of an aerial calculation, or we do have an existing entitlement that has a number of units that are approved and we apply that. It's tougher on the employment side, to be honest, but because there's just less of a blueprint going forward on what employment uses might be somewhere. In fact, in a place that already has employment, that's what turns over. You see a lot of turnover in businesses. At one point I looked, I think it was sort of in the recession, so that could have had an impact, but it was like from 2012 to 2014, 25% of the business is turned over. And so there is some change going on in that business side. So it's a little tougher, but we do a pretty good job, I think, on the residential side. So the first thing we do is really that development tracking to understand what's possible. But then we have to understand what are the projections of the future. And we do that with a process called the consensus forecast. Every 2 years, we do this. It's an assessment of forecasted population in Washoe County only. And we use 4 independent sources. And that's really what makes it a consensus forecast. When you average together 4 independent sources, the idea being that you would remove the bias of just using one source. And if one's really high, another one might be low, and that'll even out that future projection. And I like to think of it as sort of another concept of consensus, that when we do this work, we engage the local jurisdictions, RTC staff, water planning staff, folks that are planning all around the region to make sure everyone's on board. So we have a big conversation about these projections. And so there's kind of 2 meanings of consensus there. And here's what we just recently completed this. Our consensus forecast for 2020, which looks out 40 years, was just formally adopted in November. You can find it inside the regional plan on our website or on our projects and resources page. And here's what the population side looks like. So the red dashed line is that average value. That's the projection we're using right there out to 2040. And in fact, to support the RTP, we extrapolated it out to 2050 because that's the RTP year. And then you can see the 4 sources and how they vary. And I think what always jumps out at me is that early on in the record, these first few, maybe 5-6 years, they're all pretty similar. And then they start to kind of diverge in shape and where they go as they go out in time. And that's usually the case with projections. So it's really just an attempt to minimize bias. If we were just using the blue line, for instance, we'd be shooting for a way higher population than the other 3, projections are showing. Same or similar approach with employment. With this, though, there's only the 2 national sources that we use actually provide an employment estimate. So we're just averaging the 2. And there's a lot of weird lines on this slide, so I'll try to explain them. This very flat gray line is the woods and pool projection. That one takes into account what's called total employment. And so there's a difference in how the feds track employment. There's the Bureau of Labor Statistics and there's the Bureau of Economic Analysis. And they're kind of two separate federal entities. And BLS is really concerned with covered employment. So those jobs that provide basically employment insurance for unemployment. But there's a huge chunk, upwards of maybe 30% more of jobs that don't have that. Real estate agents, sole proprietorships, things along that line. So what we're really looking forward to for traffic is total employment. And so this other gray line that's down here at the bottom is what our second source told us from the IHS market source, but they only provide an estimate of covered employment. So we do an analysis that looks at those differences by industry type, and that allows us to upscale the this gray line to this green line. And then we take that average. And when we first did it, that average was this gray dashed line. But we all know we're dealing with unprecedented conditions this past year with COVID, and there was a huge unemployment spike or downward trend really in like March, April timeframe. And so we took that into account and we reduced the overall employment forecast start point by 5% to account for that, which is actually more conservative than the covered employment went down something like almost 8%. So that's how we get to employment in terms of the total over the next 20 years. And of course, we did extrapolate out 10 years to support the 2050 RTP as well. And here's what those numbers look like. So in the top chart there, we're looking at right now, basically last year, but close to now, 2020. There's about 480,000 people in Washoe County. We have about 300,000 jobs. And then we look at how that's going to grow. And so if you go down to the gray table, you can see that by 2040, we're anticipating almost 100,000 new residents in Washoe County and about 67,000 more jobs. Now, this doesn't take into account Story County directly because we just do the consensus forecast for Washoe. But Schwinn and I and Amy and Dan have had many conversations with Story County staff, and we're also bringing those jobs as they, kind of think about the future out there and what's existing into that model. Because as Schwinn mentioned, there's a huge traffic impact from all that job growth at Trick. And then I will just kind of go through this gray thing a little further. This middle column is actually what we predict. We actually predict dwelling units because it's really tough to predict people, but you can kind of predict where a house is going to be built, and these distributions of people to units. And so that's how we get here. So we're really looking at over 30 years, just about over 50,000 or right over 50,000 new dwelling units. And that's what we're predicting for the model. Okay, so that's great, but that really doesn't help us get to the ground, right? We have these two pieces. We're tracking what's possible on the ground, and then we have this other piece that tells us what's going to go on through time. And now we have to put those together, get them on the landscape so that we can aggregate them into those traffic analysis zones that Schwinn was mentioning. And so here's how we do that. It's a big collaborative process. It's not, I do a lot of the work behind the scenes on the computer, but we're always checking in. And I'm happy to be here talking to you guys and getting your feedback on what we do here too. But basically it's translating those time series projections into a spatial allocation of units. And we use a model that we actually wrote in-house using Python. And it looks at something called suitability. So we look at many different factors to sort of score each parcel. And then we move through that score, and things that we look at are sort of like distance to infrastructure or density of residential or existing entitlements to help drive that selection process. And what's so cool about it is it's actually done at this parcel level. And that means that we can aggregate this for many different uses. It's not just for traffic analysis zones, but we could look at sewer sheds or school district zones, any of that stuff. We can aggregate it and look at that future potential and demand. In order to get there, it's kind of a mess, I'll be honest with you, because of just, the reality of life and over time, how these things get approved. So we've taken this approach of sort of four main chunks that we look at when we're doing this spatial allocation. Directed units is specifically about knowledge that the local jurisdiction staff have of projects that are coming in. So rather than us try to predict something that they already know is going to happen, we take that information from them and we build it in and try to realize that as quickly as possible in the allocation. And so that's really helpful. And I would say it's about 20% of the modeled units fall into that category this time through. Then we have mixed use parcels. These are great in a lot of ways if you're like a developer or you're trying to, have a little bit of flexibility and get some stuff going on in downtown or midtown. but it's difficult from a modeling perspective because these parcels that have mixed use zoning are really open-ended. And so what we do is, and they can bear tons of units. Like if you count up all the potential units based on kind of what's approved, you could get upwards of 40,000 dwelling units in these areas. But we know that's not realistic because we haven't seen that happen. And so what we do is we look at each vacant mixed-use parcel, we look around the neighborhood at the parcels that have built, and we say, what did you build as, and how many units did you realize of your potential? And let's use that information to help guide what we think a neighboring vacant parcel might do in the future. And so that brings it down to, I think, on the order of around 10 or 11,000 potential units now in the mixed-use areas. So then we have two more categories of just straight vacant land. The first one is atomic. And by that, we basically mean we have digitized in those lot shapes like I showed you previously, where we know what the future holds for, something like that Sierra Reflections tentative map area. Conversely, in a lot of areas, big names, you've probably heard Daybreak, Stonegate, Evans Ranch, these big developments, they don't have lot line maps yet. They only have these big blobs that are like Village B, and they have a certain density. And so in that case, we use a blob approach and we sort of phase the number of units that are going to be realized as if they had been subdivided. So those are the four categories. And then I should have thrown a map in here, so I apologize. But if you check out the regional plan, there is a new approach. Maybe you guys are familiar, where we've taken the Truckee Meadows Services Area, or TMSA, and we've tiered it based on our growth priority goals and policies. We want to see growth in the core, and less so on the edges, because we're worried about VMT, we're worried about air quality, worried about sprawl, right? And we want to make sure that we're playing to our strengths. We've already invested in infrastructure and services. We want to optimize that. So with this breaks down quite a bit of information about growth and development over time and potentially in the future by these tiers. So we have a mixed use core area that's basically the downtown along Virginia and over to the Sparks Industrial and Sparks downtown area. We have tier 1, that's kind of the McCarran Ring, plus some corridor tendrils going up to the Stead Airport and down to the Summit Sierra Mall. Tier 2 is sort of the rest of the suburban area, I guess, that has been sort of entitled and built in. And then tier 3 is still within the TMSA, but these are areas where it's quite a bit of sagebrush. They might have an entitlement, but the infrastructure is very far away, that kind of thing. And then the rural areas, everything outside the TMSA. So everything in Washoe County, absent the tribal lands and the Lake Tahoe Basin up to the border of Oregon, that's our rural area. And so what this chart is telling us is a lot of great stuff. First off, that first column is talking about the total dwelling unit share. So these are the percentage of the total dwelling units, which is somewhere on the order of 180,000 dwelling units. How does that break down by these areas? And you can see that quite a bit of it is in tier 2, the suburban zone, but there is quite a bit in the McCarran Ring. It's largely built out, but like I say, we want to fill in those gaps if we can. And so then these next 3 columns talk about really looking back in the past. And I've switched the order of these in the actual published document. I should have done this for the table too, but I didn't notice it until like 5 minutes before we started. But at any rate, we're looking back at, start with the third column over here. What happened over the past 20 years? Well, only about 7% went into the mixed use core over the past 20 years. But if you look at 10 years, so sort of post-recession, about 12%, almost 13 went into that core area. And even more recently, we've seen a lot, 13.3% going in there. Generally, there's been a trend, if you look at tier 2, the suburban zone, towards less absorption of new units in the zone. So we're going from about 67, 68% down to 63% if you just look at the past 5 years. And so we're really happy to see that trend because that's exactly in line with the policies we're pushing in the regional plan and that are in the master plans of the cities and county, that we want to see growth in the core. And so we use that knowledge to basically come up with, at the far right here, the potential growth share of the future 50,000 units we're modeling. How are we going to break those out? And so we didn't want to get too far out of field from what we've been seeing, but we wanted to recognize these trends. And so we've gone with 13% in the mixed use core, 17% in tier 1. And so that is really a 30% core focused signal. And that really, it's not a huge increase, but it is by far the most core focused projection we've done since I started doing this work back in 2011. So it's really doubling down on the policies. And then we've said 60% in tier 2. We know that tier 3 already has existing entitlements, and some of those are going to get realized. So we're doing some modeling in that area as well. And finally, about 1% out in that rural area. So stuff out in Palomino Valley, out near Gerlach, all that kind of thing. Just 1%, and we've seen that percentage come down over time too, from, as you can see here, about over 2% to just over 1% in the past 5 years. So everything's moving in this kind of core focus direction, and in fact, we're seeing quite a bit more multifamily being built in association with that. So this is our target right over here to get into the zones. I kind of touched on the suitability score stuff. How we choose one parcel over another largely comes down to distance or density based on this interaction with infrastructure. And if you really want to do a deep dive into that, you can check out our housing study where we did a very similar approach, and you can get details on like all the methods of how we go about doing that. The employment, as I mentioned, is quite a bit more difficult, and but we do know that we have a footprint of parcels that can support non-residential growth only, right? And then we also have those mixed use parcels that can support both. And so we create a footprint of those areas that we have to actually try to predict new jobs into. But in fact, we also grow existing employments based on those business points we have, figuring that the areas that already have the infrastructure to support employment will continue to support employment and continue to grow to some degree. And so those two come together to do the employment forecast. And in the end, we basically aggregate that information together. We give to RTC the household sizes or total number of households, total household population, the size distribution that comes from the census, and income distribution for each TAZ, also based on census data. And we look at school information, so how many students are there in both elementary school, high school, and college. And we sum up the job categories as well. And so we have there's 6 job categories that are used. Schwinn mentioned one of them, the AMC, which is agricultural, mining, and construction. There's also kind of a warehousing one and manufacturing group. There's retail, there's service, there's other, which ends up taking care of a lot of the accommodation and entertainment sector. And finally, there's a strict gaming sector as well. So far, we've got 2020 delivered, and we've delivered basically a prototype of the end state at 2050. And I'm working right now, even right before this call, I was trying to model these interim years so we can get that delivered, and Schwinn can have all the data she needs to move on with their analysis for the RTP. And one final thing would be that, and this is a long-awaited thing, but just to take all the information we have about what we know is possible based on what's zoned and what's entitled, and just fill it all in and see what that kind of build-out scenario would do as well. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you guys might have.
Do we have any questions for the presenters this evening? There's a lot of information provided. Thank you. I guess I have one question. This is Ben Harris. So the travel demand model, was it generated or developed in-house by RTC staff? And is it maintained by RTC staff or a consultant?
So the model was developed by a consultant. They were Parsons Brinckerhoff before, and now they're WSP. And we do all the maintenance and analysis in-house.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions? Well, hearing no more questions, thank you so much for providing that update for us this evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for listening and for having us.
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to move on down the agenda on to item number 5. This item is acknowledged receipt of a report on the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan, or RTP, just for possible action.
I think we needed to acknowledge receipt of the last report.
Thank you so much, Jillian. I forgot about that.
Yeah, no worries.
Just moving back to item 4 very quickly. Can I get a motion to approve receipt of the report for item number 4 from committee member?
Yeah, this is Jillian Keller. I move to acknowledge receipt of the report.
Julian Keller moves to accept. Can I get a second?
This is Sig Rice. I will second the motion.
Dick, thank you so much. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, hearing none, item passes. Thank you. Now, on to item number 5. Do we have a report on item number 5 from staff?
Thank you. This is Amy Cummings with RTC, and I'm providing a report on where we are with our regional transportation plan. We have been working on it for over a year now. You may remember last meeting, we presented the evaluation factors that we're looking at. We showed you the data we have for traffic congestion, both in 2020 and looking out to 2050. And that's what prompted the question about where does this data come from? So really appreciate Jeremy Smith and all of the great work they do over at Truckee Meadows Regional Planning, as well as Shen Wang, who works really closely with them to develop our travel demand model. That is one of the big inputs into our regional transportation plan, as well as safety and equity and a whole host of other evaluation factors that you've looked at before. So what we wanted to share with you today is our just first cut for discussion purposes of what we're looking at for the first 10 years potentially of the plan. And I do want to say this is subject to change. Our survey has been live for about 3 weeks. It's going to be on the available on our website through Thursday of next week, January 14th. So encourage everyone to go and take a look at that survey if you haven't already. We took a look at the results we have to date. We've got about 120 plus respondents so far. So we did incorporate that into this project listing, but obviously we'll continue to update that. But since we do have a first draft for discussion purposes, we wanted to get your thoughts on that today. So I'm going to share my screen. And these are in spreadsheet form. So hopefully, and this was emailed, and I apologize that it came just this afternoon, but this was emailed to everybody on the committee earlier today. So if it's difficult to see here, you can hopefully look at it on that version as well. And I'll make it a little bit, is the screen visible?
Yes, it is.
Oh, we can see it.
Okay. Well, I want to first highlight the programs that are really the foundation of a lot of what we do at RTC. So these aren't specific projects, but they're these umbrella categories for our bicycle, pedestrian, and accessibility spot improvements. Now, right now, that funding that's currently dedicated is being used on our bus stop connectivity improvement. So that's going for the wider sidewalks around our bus stops, but it could also be used for spot improvements for other sidewalk needs or bicycle infrastructure. We also, and for that, we're projecting about $3 million a year. And again, you're going to see a lot of standalone bicycle and pedestrian projects in here. So that's not all we're spending on bicycle and pedestrian, but that just helps us cover some of those smaller spot improvements. We also have a line item for intersection improvements and traffic signals and upgrading our intersections. Right now, we're looking at about $10 million a year. That is a pretty significant increase over what it is today, which is about 5 million. And we're just seeing a big need for this. It's in many parts of our community, a more efficient way to improve the way traffic flows, as opposed to, adding lanes. So if we can sync the traffic signals and make those improvements, it really is a good bang for the buck. So we want to increase the number of intersections we can work on by bumping up this funding. And then, of course, pavement preservation. Right now, that's at about 18 million a year. We see that need continuing to increase as we have more roads in the regional system. The key principle there is we want to keep our roads in good condition because they cost less to maintain when they're in good condition. When they get down to the point of needing to be reconstructed, it costs many times more to do those types of improvements. So that one, we're looking at about 25 million per year. And then, of course, debt service. We did a huge slate of projects, Southeast Connector, or now Veterans Parkway, and Moana Lane, and a whole host of pavement preservation and reconstruction projects over the previous decade that were funded with bond revenues. So that's where the debt service is still in our ledger. Are there any questions on those programmatic line items? Okay, well, I will just keep going. So those would be annual expenses. And then when we shift down here, we're going to start talking more about individual projects. So the two big ones that, and this is looking, I should have emphasized this. This is for the 2021 to 2025 time period. So just the first 5 years. And as you all know, because you review it before it goes to our board, right now we have a 5-year transportation improvement program that goes through 2024. So a lot of this looks a lot like what's already in our 5-year plan. We have a lot of major projects in the pipeline. So in these next 5 years, we're really going to be focusing on implementing what's already in our pipeline and delivering those important improvements. But it does start to look about what the next design initiatives are going to be. So you may be familiar, NDOT is currently working on the design for 395 North, adding a southbound lane from Golden Valley to McCarran and auxiliary lanes in both directions. They're also going to be looking at future phases of the Spaghetti Bowl. The SBX, Spaghetti Bowl Express, is underway right now, but they have 5 total phases in that full package. So that'll keep progressing. And again, other projects that I know you are all familiar with, we've got the 2 on Lemon Drive, one that's the widening right there by the freeway, and the other that's Fleetwood to Chickadee, that includes the flood improvement components as well. This is a new one, the McCarran from Kitski West, to look at what kind of operational improvements we can make in that segment. Mill Street widening, we did a corridor study several years ago, and that identified the need for more capacity between Kitski and Terminal Way, particularly the freeway. And NDOT is doing the design for this portion as part of the Spaghetti Bowl project. So we should be receiving that in the next year or so. Pyramid Highway is another big one, and I wanted to try to bring up another graphic about Pyramid Highway. So this is, because this is one of the most significant investments in the regional system that we're going to be looking at. And of course, as the name would make you think, the Pyramid 395 connector is a new road between Pyramid Highway and 395, but it's much more than that. And the first phase is this purple segment here from Queen Way up to Los Altos. So that we just got our build grant. We're going to be having that under construction in the next couple of years. But you can see there are, 20 years worth of future phases. So this purple one is the first. This extension of Disk Drive over here in Sparks is the second. And then actually tackling the connector itself is the third. And then widening farther up Pyramid Highway up to Calle de la Plata is a subsequent phase. So I wanted to put all, you see Pyramid Highway in here a lot, and I just wanted to add some context to what you're seeing. Sky Vista, that one is under design, and Sparks Boulevard. I know you've seen that one. That's an $80 million investment to improve Sparks Boulevard from Gregg Street to just north of Bering. And that will be split over. There's $40 million in this 5-year section, but we think that's going to spill over with another $40 million in the next time period. This next slate of projects are for design only. We don't anticipate being able to construct them within the 5-year time period, but we do want to get the work started. And these are a lot of projects that came out of our South Meadows study that Sean was our project manager for and finished up earlier this year. And then under multimodal, you'll see several projects here that came out of our downtown circulation study, which I know many of you are familiar with. And that's this sort of suite of projects focusing on 3rd, 4th, and 5th Street on the west side of downtown with improving pedestrian safety, lighting, amenities, and bike infrastructure, particularly on 5th, and really focusing on 3rd as a buffered, providing a buffered bike lane on 3rd Street. And I'll skip down a little bit because this was also in the downtown circulation study. The Vine Street buffered bike lane is another one that came out of that. And those are a combination of 4 projects that all work together. We're also working on replacing the Arlington bridges, the Center Street cycle track. Let's see, Moana, it's some sidewalk improvements, Mount Rose Highway safety improvements, and we're really excited that Audie Wells is going to be going to construction next year. So that one's been in the pipeline for quite a long time. And Sun Valley Boulevard will be going to construction, excuse me, the first phase under construction now is about to wrap up. But this is that 7th to Scottsdale section that came out of our quarter plan. And that one we've got preliminary design, but that does need to progress all the way through final design. So are there any thoughts or questions about the first 5 years that we're recommending, or not recommending at this point, but just putting forth for discussion for the RTP? All right. Well, then let's go on to, and again, for today, we only have the first 10 years for everybody to look at. So, and I won't go through everything line by line quite so much on this one. Again, the programs, we want to continue funding on an annual basis for those because that just really keeps our system operating well. We have the next set of NDOT improvements on the freeways, additional lanes on 395 North, Clear Acre to Parr, the next section up Golden Valley to Stead, and the future phases of Spaghetti Bowl. And many of these projects are currently in our 10-year program. Some of the new ones, the Damani Ranch Parkway, that again came out of our South Meadows study. The Moya Boulevard extension is a new one in this plan. And that is one that the Reno Stead Airport will be participating in to extend Moya up to Lemon Drive. So that is one that we haven't, is new to this RTP. Widening Pembroke, there's a lot more traffic in that corridor now because of Veterans Parkway. So we've received a lot of concern, or heard a lot of concern about that. Other projects new to this plan are improving Virginia Street with the, it's really to support the off-ramp movement near the In-N-Out Burger to add another northbound lane so that people can make a free right there. Continuing with Sparks Boulevard and Vista, and those are all projects that are in our current plan. And in terms of multimodal, 4th Street, and that is 4th Street in Sparks. I know it's a little confusing because we have multiple 4th Streets. So the first one is in Sparks, and the second one is on West 4th Street over near to McCarran. Some of the other things that are new in this plan are sidewalk improvements on Gregg Street, more upgrades to McCarran, and we're going to be doing a quarter study on McCarran this year, so we'll refine those more and get more input from all of you on specifically what those are going to look like over the coming year. Another new one to this plan is improvements on Rock Boulevard for bicycle and pedestrian, and continuing our improvements on Sutro Street. So this is our current working draft, again, just for discussion and for folks to start taking a look at and digesting. If you don't have questions or comments for us today, that's fine. You're welcome to reach out to me or Dan at any time if you have other thoughts or questions that come to mind. And we'll be back next meeting with a more refined list that includes everything from 2031 all the way to 2050 as well.
Do we have any questions this evening for Ms. Cummings? Any questions? Well, it looks like we don't have any more questions this evening, but thank you so much for the update. I know it's a lot of work ongoing.
Thank you so much.
Can I get a motion to acknowledge receipt of the report for the RTP?
I move that we acknowledge receipt. Harvey Cates.
Harvey Cates moves. Can I get a second, please?
Suraj Verma, I'll second.
Suraj Verma, second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the report has been acknowledged. Thank you very much. We are moving on to item number 6. Member announcement. Any member announcements or agenda items that you'd like to see? Any announcements? Well, I guess I have an announcement. My wife and I welcomed our second grandson into the world on December 18th.
Congratulations.
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 Thank you very much. Any other announcements? Okay, hearing none, moving on to item number 7. Do we have any items from the RTC Ride Access staff this evening?
I do not have any items, but as always, I'd turn it over to my RTC colleagues.
I do not.
Okay, all right. Well, moving on to item number 8. Did we receive any additional public comment for the meeting this evening, Dan?
We did not.
At least one item left. Can I get a motion to move for adjournment?
I move to adjourn. Suraj Verma.
Suraj Verma moves to adjourn. Can I get a second?
This is Sigyan Rice. I second the motion.
6 seconds. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, we adjourn the meeting at 6:31.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year. Thank you, everyone.
Happy New Year.